Wonderful. Okay. So welcome to everybody that's just joined us on Facebook. Welcome to this event on valuing multilingualism. So I'm here with Adrienn Szlapak. Hi, Adrienn. How are you?
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Where are you joining us from today?
Currently from Hungary, which is my home country.
Excellent, wonderful. And is it quite warm there? You said you mentioned it was hot.
Yes, we are experiencing a heat wave.
Right, right. Okay. So, well, let's hope that we can stay cool and have a nice session this morning with everyone that's here. Okay, so Adrienn is going to talk to us about L1 in the young learner classroom. We're really excited to have her. She is an experienced EAL and ESL teacher. So that's English as an additional language and English as a second language. And she's a real specialist in that area. She lives in Malaysia and she's also involved in teacher training and academic management. So Adrienn holds a master's in cognitive linguistics, a Cambridge Delta, and a PGCE. She's been blogging about ESL and EAL on her personal blog and also on ealdiaries.com. We'll share the links. And on the IATEFL YLT special interest group blog. Specializing in young learner topics, where she is the current editor. So, wow, we're really excited to hear what you've got to say. I'm going to pass over to you now. If you need me for anything, I'm here, but I'm going to disappear until the end of the session otherwise.
Thank you. So let me share my slides first and foremost. Joanna, can you just confirm that you can see my slides?
Yeah, perfect.
And now you can still see my slides, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So welcome, everyone. So I'm excited to be here and discuss this all-important topic about first languages in the young learner classroom with you. And before we start, just a quick disclaimer regarding the use of certain terms in today's webinar. So in today's session, I will be using the terms L1s, first languages, home languages, and mother tongues interchangeably to refer to the same concept. We're not going to go into the differences in between those terms. So just for today's webinar, please keep that in mind. So here is what I'm planning on covering today. We're going to explore the research supporting the use of first languages, as well as some pedagogical frameworks that embrace them. We'll also delve into the practical aspects of first language use and some effective classroom strategies and tips. And I'm also going to try and address some of the anticipated challenges that working with multiple languages in the English language teaching classroom can bring up. So by the end of this webinar, my hope is that you'll gain ideas on how to integrate first languages to support English language development and to effectively manage a multilingual classroom environment. So if you're interested in learning more about how to leverage your students' first languages, then you've come to the right place. Let's get started. And I'd like to start with a little story. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a second here so that I can tell you my story. So this is the story of how I became interested in this topic of using first languages for the purposes of teaching English. Up to the age of 15, I was growing up monolingually in rural Hungary, where I am talking to you from at the moment. And I only started learning English as a second language in a dual language or immersion school context when I started attending high school. And my teachers in this school, they varied in their approach to using first languages in the classroom, but in general, they used it very little, if at all. and always judiciously. As my English proficiency developed, I came to see Hungarian as a crutch, and I felt that I needed to outgrow it if I wanted to become a successful English speaker. I wonder if some of you can maybe relate to this. Now, many years down the line, when I was a Delta candidate, I found that I had some very strong feelings about the use of mother tongues in the English language classroom. Namely, I felt that they should be nowhere near the classroom. I never allowed my learners to use their first languages, and I was always very clear about this when we were co-creating the classroom rules. When some of my students inadvertently reverted to their home languages, I kindly but firmly reminded them that they shouldn't do that. And I even took pride in having an English-only classroom. So when my Delta tutor challenged me to plan a lesson where my young learners would need to use their first languages, I was outraged. Sorry, Chris. But I went ahead with it because I didn't feel like I had much of a choice. And I stumbled upon community language learning, or CLL, which is a humanistic approach from the 1970s that uses home languages for the purposes of learning English. And having worked my way through this assignment, I feel like I emerged as a different teacher on the other side. So thanks, Chris. And what I learned is that there was a lot that I had to unlearn to be able to learn more about how to teach English. So this is the reason why I started down this journey of learning a little bit more about, sorry, I need to share my slides again. So this is why I started this journey of learning a little bit more about how to use home languages in the classroom. So now I have a question for you. I would like to know, how frequently do you or the learners in your classrooms use their first languages in your lessons? Could you please put your answers in the chat? I'm going to, okay, I can see your answers now. That's great. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, some of you are giving me some very specific percentages, so that's really interesting. And some of you are saying very little or not at all. Okay. That's fascinating. I can see lots of 50-50 and sometimes, and some of you are pointing out when you're using first languages. So for instance, Margarita says to give instructions is one of the ways in which she uses first languages. And Amira is saying that the students are using the languages, their home languages, when they're communicating amongst each other. Tabello is also mentioning giving instructions. So this is something that will come up a little bit later in the webinar as well. Victoria is saying only when necessary. Oh, that's really okay. So it seems like some of you are saying that when you're teaching younger learners, like primary aged young learners, there seems to be a bit more use of the first languages. It's definitely something that I can relate to. And again, this is something that I will be talking about a little bit more, a little bit later. So Lala is saying, I don't let my students, but they use it when they can't explain their thoughts in a foreign language. Yes, Lala, I can so relate to that. I don't share a language with my students that I currently teach, and I often have to rely on them trying to clarify meaning amongst themselves in the home languages. That's great. Bharati says they tend to speak their mother tongue, but use English when asked to. So that hints at learner training, so they know when they need to use the language of the medium of instruction versus when they can use their home languages. And Xenia says, I would say teens tend to use more of first languages as they got used to it in public schools. That's really interesting, Xenia. I wonder where you're teaching, what your context is. Horace is saying 90% of the time, but strictly English when talking to me. That's really, really fascinating. Thank you so much. So before the webinar, you had the chance to fill in a pre-webinar survey where we asked you a couple of questions about the use of first languages. And this particular one was one of them. How familiar you are with pedagogical frameworks that embrace the use of first languages in the English language teaching classroom. And I found the results quite fascinating because just like in the chat, the rest of the responses to the pre-webinar survey suggested that actually quite a few of the people who responded use first languages, at least sometimes for some purposes. And the majority of people were saying that the students sometimes use first languages. However, as you can see, over 50% of the respondents reported that they aren't familiar with pedagogical frameworks that embrace the use of first languages in the classroom. So that I found quite interesting. And this is one of the aspects that we will be talking about and dedicating time to today in today's webinar. We're going to look at some of the research that underpins the use of home languages and why it's useful. And then we'll move on to looking at some of the pedagogical frameworks that make use of this. So let's move on to the research and the benefits of using first languages to learn second languages. So what does the research say? Well, you might be familiar with the monolingual principle, which is the belief that the best way to teach a language is to only use that language, leaving no space for the use of the learner's first languages. We best teach a language by using only that language, says Sharples. But this approach to language teaching, although it is deeply rooted in most education systems around the world, especially when it comes to teaching English, it's been refuted. There is increasing evidence from research showing that supporting learners' first language development helps them to learn additional languages. And this is something that I personally have seen time and time again in my practice. So if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about all the research that refutes the monolingual principle, then Holland Cook's resource from 2012 is one to read. I highly recommend it. There are clear benefits to the use of first languages. Teachers' use of the learners' first languages in class has been found to contribute to the learners' cognitive growth, to their emotional, social, and cultural capital, or their knowledge base. And all of these are so incredibly important, especially in a young learner classroom. Edstrom suggests that there is a value-based judgment at play here. So the use of the first languages involves a value-based judgment in which the teachers have a moral obligation almost to use the learner's own language judiciously in order to recognize the learners as individuals, to communicate respect and concern, and to create a positive and effective environment for learning. Again, so important, especially when we're working with young people. And as little wouldn't you suggest, attitudes matter, because the extent to which own language use or mother tongue use occurs in class depends on the attitudes of the teachers and the learners towards that language's legitimacy or value in the English language teaching classroom. And many studies report a sense of guilt among teachers when learners use their own languages in class. And this is something that Melissa, Joanna, and I were actually briefly discussing before we started this webinar, that maybe 10, 15 years ago, when I first started out in teaching in a multilingual context, I always felt like if my students were using their home languages, that was somehow a reflection on me as a teacher, as in I wasn't successful enough, but a number of studies have uncovered positive attitudes, particularly as a way of reducing learners' anxiety and creating a humanistic classroom. The use of the learner's own language has been found to be prevalent within ELT classrooms, even in contexts where it is discouraged. So it's really interesting, isn't it, that it doesn't matter what the nationwide policy says, teachers will use and allow learners to use their home languages when they see it fit. So that means many teachers actually recognize the importance of English as predominant, but not necessarily the only language in the classroom. So the policy isn't English only, but rather English mainly and not only. And this is certainly something that I relate to and I swear by in my own practice. So then now, let me tell you a little bit about my context, okay? So currently I work in a big international school in Malaysia, where I lead the English as an additional language department of the elementary section. So I work with students from years 1 to 6, approximately from the ages of 5 to 11. And we work with learners who join this school with little to no English. And they have to learn English as the language, but also subject content through English. So they have double the challenge. And as you can imagine, this is quite the challenge for any young learner. But I'm happy to say that more often than not, all of these young people rise to the occasion, and it's been wonderful working with these young people. Now, in such a context, it's been essential for me to research and experiment with these pedagogical frameworks that embrace the use of home languages, because I have to, first of all, know what I'm doing. I need to be able to communicate that to the people who come and observe me in my lessons. And I also need to be able to advise the people in my team, the teachers in my team. And what I found is that by encouraging our learners to leverage their home languages, we are better able to tap into their knowledge, the knowledge that they bring with themselves, and use that to help them develop their English language skills. So let's get back to my slides. And talk about these pedagogical frameworks. So the first one that I'd like to talk about is culturally sustaining pedagogies. This term refers to inclusive teaching practices that aim to sustain the learner's own cultural and linguistic identities at the same time as they are learning through this additional language, which happens to be English in my context, and I'm assuming in yours as well. Culturally sustaining pedagogies promote equity, and they ensure that the learner's own identities are present and respected in an educational setting. So the little bit that I told you about my context, I think makes it clear that something like this is essential to be working with learners who have this double challenge of learning the language, learning the content, and getting familiar with a culture that they aren't familiar with, while preserving and maintaining their own identities. Recent research studies have highlighted the importance of using multilingual learners' languages as a resource through pedagogical translanguaging. It's an instructional approach that uses the learner's whole linguistic repertoire to improve their language and content learning. So that, in a sense, means that a learner is able to rely on any languages that they speak to any extent, as long as it helps them learn in the classroom. Creating a space for the learner's first languages is crucial because it makes them feel valued and included. It also acts as a scaffold to access learning the language, but also learning content through that language. And it's immensely useful for their language development. Now, I'm sure you know this, but translanguaging has been much debated. And there is a good and very recent critique by Janine Treffers-Deller from the University of Reading. So it's just been published. If you're interested, I definitely highly recommend reading that piece. And we will be talking more about translanguaging in session 3 today. So stay tuned. I'd also like to talk a little bit about functional approaches to language development. These emphasize that language is a tool for communication first and foremost, and therefore it is a resource for meaning making. Learners are encouraged to explore meaning in a text with an emphasis on the function that it serves within that social setting. For example, when they are reading a piece of writing, then they are exploring the impact of the author's choice of words or grammatical functions on the reading audience. These functional approaches contrast with structural approaches to language teaching and learning. A structural approach typically involves learning a language in a systematic and predefined manner with a gradual progression and a gradual challenge. So the learners will typically need to master a specific language structure before they move on to the next one. I'm sure that most of you will be working in contexts where that's the case. I've most certainly worked in a context like that for the majority of my career. A functional approach, however, exposes learners to meta-language, and it encourages them to focus on how language works. So this contrasts with what many language schools practice in my experience. Because in my experience, teachers of young learners are often encouraged or maybe required to teach grammar without using meta-language so as not to overwhelm our learners. But in my current context, we find that equipping our learners with the knowledge of meta-language and providing them with learner training of this sort allows them to become more aware of how language works and more independent as language learners. Now, let's have a look at some practical aspects of the use of first languages in the primary classroom specifically. So these are based on what I do in my classroom, but also underpinned by research. So let's talk about pedagogic functions of the first language use. The majority of the participating teachers in Hall and Cook study reported using the learners' own languages to explain meaning, especially when it was unclear in English. And some of you mentioned this in the chat earlier as well. Or to explain vocabulary or grammar when they considered it necessary. They also identified the use of first languages as useful for maintaining class discipline and to build a better teacher-learner rapport. So now in the chat, could you please let me know, do you use first languages for any of these things in your own classroom? You can just type A, B, or C in the chat, and let me just see what, okay, lots of you are saying A, some of you are saying all. Oh, actually, a lot of you are saying all of them. Yes, lots of you are saying A or all. That's really interesting. So conveying meaning seems to be one of the key points where first languages seem to be useful in the classroom. Okay, more people have started saying B as well, so maintaining class discipline. But the majority of you are saying all. Yes, I can definitely relate to that. So I use first languages for all of these things, except in my current context. I am unable to use first languages for maintaining class discipline, and I do not share first languages with my students. Sometimes I wish I did though, because I think it would be really, really useful sometimes. Let's move on to talk a little bit more about translanguaging now, because translanguaging has been almost like a buzzword lately, I feel, or maybe that's just me because I've been reading so much about it. It is definitely a really useful resource in the classroom. However, when to use it is the big question. So TransLanguaging is an approach that uses the learner's whole linguistic repertoire for the purposes of learning a new language. And it can be used in many situations. So the examples that you can see on the screen are adapted from Bentley and Dale's resource. And these are also some of the times when I use TransLanguaging in my classroom actively, as a pedagogical function. So I like to ask my learners to brainstorm in their home languages, especially if they are new to English, if they are only starting out on their journey to learn English and they aren't confident enough. I feel that this helps. It brings forward the ideas without adding the extra pressure of, I don't know how to say that in English. It's also useful when learners need to predict the result of an experiment or make deductions or inferences. And this carries through any subject really, but it is this is one of the ways in which I use it in my classroom as well. For instance, when I show them a video, before we watch it or when I stop it at a certain point, I will ask them to make predictions. And if they aren't confident enough to express that in English right away, I will let them talk to each other in their home languages first. It's also useful when they carry out an experiment or a group project and have to communicate immediate needs to each other. And they need to do that quickly and effectively. And it does not take away from the overall experience, but it saves an incredible amount of time. TransLanguaging is also useful when they need to talk about the results of that experiment and they need to present their thoughts on a particular topic. So when they have to feed back to the whole class, I like to give them a little bit of time to use TransLanguaging amongst themselves first so that they can produce the output in English. Of course, the output has to be in English because that's the reason why they are in my class and because that's the only language I share with them. And last but not least, TransLanguaging is useful when reporting the highlights of any discussion to the class. So think, pair, share is a very frequent and much loved activity in the context where I work. Building in TransLanguaging sections into that allows the learners to be better able to highlight and share those highlights with the class in English. So how can we incorporate first languages in the classroom? Brainstorming was mentioned earlier. So brainstorming helps learners to actively engage with a new topic. It's a great activity. However, it is quite a complex cognitive process. It requires a lot of processing because the learners are thinking about the question and the topic of the discussion, while they are also trying to establish the relationship between these contexts. And they are trying to do all of that in a language that they aren't confident and comfortable in yet. So what can we do? We need to set the context. We can provide a prompt such as a picture, guiding questions, a quote to establish the context. And that is really important. Context needs to be clear so that the learners know what they are required to be thinking about. And then we can give them access to devices or a dictionary so that they know that they have the support, the language support, if they need it. Of course, if we can group them together by home languages and they can support each other, that's even better. We need to make sure that we give clear instructions. Learners need to know what is expected of them and how they can use their first languages. So creating groups and asking students to respond to the provided prompts is step one. Now, how do you create the group? Can you group them together based on first languages, or maybe you can group them together with a more confident English speaker supporting someone who is newer to English? Learners can brainstorm on paper or on a mini whiteboard, or maybe even on a virtual whiteboard if you're teaching online. They can add their contributions in any language they feel, or if they aren't able to read and write yet, maybe they can draw pictures or add pictures if it's an online whiteboard. It's just important that we set clear expectations that everyone has to contribute in some way. Give students a reasonable time limit that accounts for the needs that they have to come up with the ideas, and then they need to translate them into another language. So make sure that there is enough time for them to carry out the task. While they are working, monitor the students carefully, and provide language support as and when needed. Also, encourage your learners to support each other if they can, because it is part of learner training, and it is good for them to be using their English in this way as well, supporting each other. Allow access to dictionaries or translation apps. And while you're listening, take notes of emergent language that you can feed back later to the whole class. And if time allows, maybe mix up the groups so that they can move around and rotate around the room, and they get the chance to look at other groups' contributions as well. Last but not least, ask the learners to share their ideas. This can be done by putting up posters around the walls or adding each group's ideas to a joint online document. You can use the notes that you've taken earlier to provide feedback on language that the learners need to be able to use successfully if they want to express their ideas in English. And ensure that each learner has a written copy of the work that they created in English, maybe with notes in their home languages by the end of the brainstorming session. Another way in which you can incorporate first languages in the classroom is the flipped classroom approach. So this is a lesson framework that gives learners access to the materials that you would like to use in the classroom, so they can engage with it beforehand. For instance, you want the learners to watch a video prior to the lesson, and you give them access to the video with a set of comprehension questions. So they do that before they come to the lesson. During the lesson, they will be working with that video content, and they will have to bring their answers to the comprehension questions. So here, what you can do is provide the prompts to help the learners focus on the most important aspects of the text or the video or the listening material that you want them to engage with before the lesson. For example, as I mentioned, you can give them comprehension questions, or you can ask them to summarize certain parts, or maybe you can provide some research prompts that they can use. Encourage the learners to engage with the materials in their home language. For instance, allow them to use Google Translate while reading the text at home and take notes in their home languages. And then let them answer the comprehension questions in their home languages first, and then use Google Translate to translate that into English and bring that to class with them. It's important to check their work at the beginning of the next lesson and acknowledge all answers, regardless of what language the contributions were in. Don't know how you feel about this, but as long as my students engage with the materials that I want them to engage with in any language, that makes me so, so happy. And I find that even if they only answer the questions in their home languages, they are better prepared to actually engage with the content in the lesson itself. They can be asked to draft their written work in their home languages, and this gives them a chance to engage meaningfully with the topic before they have to process it in English. This way, the cognitive load is lower when drafting the work, because the concepts come to them more readily in the language that they are confident in. And there is no need to allocate mental resources to translating yet. So set the expectations. Make sure that the learners understand the task and the expectations before they start doing any writing. Ask them to write the first draft in their mother tongues. They can do this at home or in class, depending on how much time you have. Provide language support. Give them time to identify the words and expressions, or maybe grammatical structures that they will need to look up in English, and provide support if possible. But if, like me, you do not share first languages with your learners, allow learners to use dictionary or maybe AI tools or an online translation software. These are all good ways of helping them support themselves better. And if there are more confident English speakers with the same first language, then group them together to help each other during the planning and the drafting stages, as well as during this translation process. Last but not least, set clear success criteria. Maybe provide a checklist or any kind of success criteria and ask the learners to assess their first draft. Make it clear to the learners that the final draft will need to be in English and that just simply typing in their whole text into Google Translate or an AI tool is not going to be sufficient. Maybe get learners to write the final draft in class at least the first couple of times so that you can assess how independently they can work. You can encourage your learners to keep a bilingual glossary. When they need to take note of any new vocabulary, they can write down their first language translations. These can be handwritten records, or you can leverage technology. And either way, this ensures that they are using their whole linguistic repertoires, and it also builds on their previous knowledge. It is also a great way to train learners to use their home languages as support and do that independently. So when you are opting for handwritten records, you can use just a few dedicated pages in the back of a notebook or a dedicated notebook if you prefer. And the good thing about handwritten records is that they don't rely on access to technology, and the students can use it at home and regardless of their age, because younger students can use it as handwriting practice. And if they aren't able to actually write independently yet, they can draw images or stick pictures to represent the meaning. When you're using technology, you have lots of options, especially in the age of AI. So software and apps such as Quizlet that allow learners access to the words or expressions that you input there during and after the lesson can make the learning fun and the revision fun as well. So creating these virtual vocabulary cards in Quizlets can be a collaborative project that your learners do in class or out of class together. Upper primary learners can be taught to add terms themselves and use the interactive features for study and revision more independently. And younger learners will benefit more from teacher involvement in the creation of these vocabulary cards. But once they are created, they should be able to use it independently, even at home. As always, consistency is key. But setting up any form of bilingual glossary requires learner training and consistency. However, with time and plenty of practice and clear expectations that you set, all learners can learn to manage these glossaries themselves. And as a result, they will become more independent in their own learning, and they will have more control of their own learning as well. Let's move on to looking at some classroom management challenges. So here are the most typical ones in my experience, and also based on my research. Too many different first languages in the classroom, a shared language between the teacher and the class, English-only school policies, and resistance from colleagues. So again, in the chat, can I ask you to type in 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on what challenges do you face when using first languages in the classroom? Okay, I can see lots of 3s and 4s, couple of 1s. Okay. Oh, it does seem like English-only school policies are more frequent than I realized. That's really interesting. And resistance from colleagues. Right. Okay, now more of you are saying shared languages as well. Very interesting. Thank you. So what can you do when these challenges inadvertently arise in your classroom? You need to set rules around language use, in my experience. it's important to establish when and how the languages can be used. And here is some guidance. The output must be in English so that everyone understands all the ideas. Explain what form of language support is allowed, for instance, dictionaries or Google Translate or AI. When TransLanguaging is used, acknowledge all contributions, regardless of the language, as I mentioned before, and keep it positive. We must avoid making learners feel that speaking their mother tongues is wrong or not valued. Reinforce the rules. It's not enough just to set them, right? We need to reinforce them. Just like teaching young learners anything, learner training is key when it comes to use of home languages as well. They need practice of using their first languages in the classroom before they master it. And they are bound to test their boundaries and forget the rules sometimes. So it's important to find ways to reinforce these rules in a firm but friendly manner. So learner training, as I mentioned, visual reminders as well. Young learners, especially the youngest young learners, will benefit from visual reminders. In my lessons, I use a double-sided reminder, which is basically on the front or one side, I have a mashup of all the English-speaking countries' flags to show that this is a time when we're speaking English in class. And when I flip it over, it's a bunch of all sorts of flags from all around the world, which shows that they are allowed to or encouraged to use their home languages at those times during the lesson. And it works really well because it somehow exists independently from me, and the students have now started policing each other as well. Timers are really, really useful as well. Because by simply putting a timer on, the learners will know when they need to switch to English, how long they have for drafting their writing in their mother tongue. And again, it exists outside of you. So it is a rule that is often more respected. Last but not least, my top tips. Trust the process. Letting learners use languages that you don't speak or don't understand can be scary, and it can be uncomfortable at times, but it is worth it in the long run because it builds trust between you and your learners, and it allows you to get to know your learners better. Value all languages. It's so important. If we want to be building better relationships with our students, then we need to take all of them, including their languages, their identity, into account, and put rules in place so that everyone is clear about the expectations and the boundaries surrounding the use of first languages. If you'd like to know a little bit more about tips and tricks of suggested techniques of how you can use first languages, Peter, Clement, and myself have written a book supporting EAL learners' strategies for inclusion. It is about to be published by Delta Publishing. It should be published in a couple of weeks, so watch out for that. This was my plan for today. I would just like to ask you in the chat as a last thing before we go to the Q&A, which parts did you find most useful? Can you please just let me know in the chat? So we had research and the benefits of using first languages. That was 1. 2 was pedagogical frameworks. 3 was practical strategies. And 4, classroom management and the challenges. Okay. Thank you so much. So many people are saying all of them. Thank you. And I can see lots of you are saying 3 and 4. So the practical strategies. Thank you so much for your feedback. And I'm happy if you managed to find something valuable in the session. If you'd like to keep in touch with me, you can follow me on my blog, ealdiaries.com. And from there, you'll have access to my other socials, like I'm mostly on LinkedIn, sometimes on X. Send me a request on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to make your acquaintance. Thank you so much for joining me today. Going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Adrienn. That was so interesting. And I can see from all of the comments and the enthusiasm how much people identify with both the challenges and the benefits of using home languages or multiple languages in class. That is so interesting, and we've got lots of questions. So let's go straight away and see how many of these we can deal with. Some of them, I think this question came in quite early and then you gave examples, right? But Ahmed says, can you provide examples of activities that effectively incorporate L1 to support English language acquisition? Now, you gave lots of examples. Could you just give us like one and really like break it down? What are the steps?
Okay, I think let me just talk about one that I sort of mentioned, but I didn't give a specific example of, and that would be maybe how first languages can be really useful for comparative language analysis. And I know that's a really scary term, and we don't necessarily talk about these things when we teach young learners, but as I mentioned in my context, it is immensely useful if a learner is able to identify a noun, a verb, or an adjective. And for them to be able to do that, I need to know what they know in their home languages, because some languages aren't created equal. So what I can express with a noun in my home language, Hungarian, doesn't necessarily transfer into English, and I needed to be able to understand that so that I can learn English. Or word order. English has a very set word order, and once you crack it, great. But if you're just trying to speak English the way that your mother tongue sets up a sentence, you're not going to get far. So these are just some teeny tiny things that I think, yes, it involves meta language, and yes, it is a linguistic activity, but I need home languages to be able to successfully do this. So one way in which I've actually seen this done in a classroom that I had the privilege of being in is one of my colleagues. Just some of the students were late to her lesson, so she speaks a little bit of Mandarin Chinese, and that's one of the main languages of our students. So she wrote a sentence in English on her board, and the first student who came in was a Chinese speaker. She asked the Chinese speaker to translate that into Chinese. And she was like, oh, I'm not sure that that's correct. She didn't say anything, but she asked the next student, can you read that? She deleted the English, can you read that? And then they translated it back into English. And there was a little bit of a mistake, and that resulted in some very useful conversation. Then when other speakers, like Korean speakers, arrived, then they translated it into Korean, and then they ended up talking about where certain elements, like where is a noun in a sentence in Chinese versus English versus Korean. And it does not have to be a long activity, but I also think it's genuinely interesting for learners to find out a little bit more about their own languages and other languages. Plus, it just trains them to be better language speakers, which is what we want.
Yeah, definitely. Also, in that context, they're the experts on their language, right?
Exactly.
So there's that motivation to explain to you and to educate you. That's where the equity thing comes, right?
It's so very interesting how motivated they become when they're able to teach something to their teachers for sure, but to each other as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that example. So a question from Shriyita, who says, I come from India. India is a multilingual country with 22 official languages. In a given class, the L1 is varied. For example, in one of my classes of 20 students, there are on average at least 3 home languages. In such a scenario, how do we approach the students, especially when you do not know the languages or dialects? Do you have any tips for dealing with that and for creating rapport? What can you do?
It is, first of all, it is scary, and I can relate, because Malaysia is a multilingual country. There aren't 22 official languages, but there are quite 3 official languages, and I don't speak any of them. Plus, we have students coming from abroad. So in my classroom, it's typical to have at least 2 languages that I don't speak, sometimes 3. If you have more than one student speaking the same home language, then that's what I would do first. I would group them together for the activities where you'd like them to be using their home languages, and then mix them up again. So by no means do I suggest that they have to be together all the time, but it can be an immense support. or you can dedicate times of the lesson to when home languages can be used. And I've seen this done in an English literature lesson, actually, where the students were reading the same text in English, and then they could go to their home language corners where they could have discussions about the content of what they read in their home languages. And again, this is, it was just a couple of minutes in the middle of the lesson, but it allowed them to clarify meaning with each other without having to be stuck in the same pairings all the time. Now, depending on school policy, hopefully your students have access to some sort of support. AI might not be allowed, especially if you're working with younger learners, but Google Translate could help. And maybe even just, if all you have is paper-based dictionaries, if you can source some dictionaries that help your learners, then it's more about managing the time in the class that you dedicate to that activity, or maybe use the flipped classroom approach and ask them to, here is the list of key vocabulary for our following lesson. Can you please look these up? And then bring that to class.
Okay, that's great.
That's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's really interesting the way you really clearly communicate your expectations with, like you said about the cards with flags. Okay, what language are we speaking? Or a home language corner. So you really clearly mark and delineate the space. So it's not just constantly fluids, kind of anything goes, right? You're being very clear about that.
Yes. Well, I mean, a school is a school. In an ideal world, everyone could use whatever language they want at whatever point, but then how do I know what they know? So at certain times, I will have to make sure that we're using a language that everybody understands. We're quite clear in my school context, we're quite clear about terming it as that. We use a language that includes everyone, rather than, we don't say use English only, we say use a language that includes everyone.
Okay, yes. Another interesting question here from Ahmed. What are the limits of using L1 in the classroom? And how can I ensure that it doesn't hinder my students' English language development?
That's a really interesting question, and there is lots of debate about this out there. And to answer your question, Ahmed, shortly, I don't know what the limit is. I'm experimenting with using first languages as much as anyone. Maybe I'm a little bit further down the road, and I've certainly come across times in my classroom where I felt like, well, they aren't really using their home languages for what I want them to use it for. And if that is the case, classroom management comes into play. So when I feel like my students are not doing what I'm asking them to do, I refer back to our classroom contract or the flag behind me, and I point at it and just try to direct them back to the activity. It's always I try to lead with curiosity, so I'm going to try and ask them first, maybe just a quick quiet chat, what's going on, because there might be a reason why they are not doing what they're doing. But I would say you have to treat that case by case rather than there being a framework that you can just put into place.
Yes, definitely. I used to do that quite a lot with my students, though, like after the break, come in and say, what are you talking about? Even if I knew what they were talking about, because then they would tell me, or you say, like, what's going on? And then they tell you. So you can exploit the fact that you pretend you don't understand, or you genuinely don't understand, and get them to communicate that. Okay, let's do one more question and then we're running out of time. But there's a question from Dua on Facebook who says, sometimes words need a backup context or cultural example. Is this a case for using L1?
It could be, absolutely. And yes, definitely. We struggle with this sometimes because in our context, we're a British international school, so we follow the British curriculum, and some of the text, the set text that the students have to read are difficult for the students to comprehend simply because of cultural references that they do not understand. And I do feel that asking them to maybe engage with that text outside of class and trying to find a way to relate that to something that that they have experience with and bring that back into class can be helpful. Because since I don't speak their languages, I need a way to break down that barrier. So poetry, for instance, sometimes we have to teach them poetry, and asking them to bring in examples of poems from their cultures brings that closer.
Yeah.
So maybe primes them a little bit for then being able to deal with poems in English.
Right, right. Definitely. Okay. Thank you. Well, I could be here all day talking to you. We've got more questions coming in. But you're coming back. Are you with us on Facebook?
Yes, I am going to try to join in on Facebook. I'm really excited about this event today. And if I can't watch the next session live, then I will definitely watch it as a recording. Because thank you so much for having me. Thank you for putting on this wonderful event about this so important topic that's so close to my heart.
Thanks so
And
much
thank you everyone for joining me today.
Thanks, everybody. So fantastic. Thank you as well to Karen, who is moderating on Facebook, and Melissa, who is here, as always, behind the scenes, helping everybody and making sure everything works smoothly. So we'll take a short break now before our next session, and come back in 15 minutes for the second session of the day. So thanks to everybody. Thank you so much, Adrienne, and we'll see you all later.
Bye.